last session. That's big pressure, and I understand that. And I understand that some people closed the place down last night. You're already thinking about if I gotta get a flight, where do I gotta go? Let me ask you this. If you didn't have to work with people, would it be easier? How many people feel like their technical degrees were really good and helpful, but you probably at this point are wondering, I should have done something in psychology. How frustrating can it be when we work with people? Is it sometimes frustrating? Is it hard? Can it be difficult? So let's talk for a moment about that. Now, having said that, I don't want it to be just a repetition of things we've heard before, or that, hey, we've been down these roads and we've talked about these things. But how many people have heard that trust is important at work? Yeah, we've talked about it a lot. In fact, in leadership conferences, we've been talking about it for decades. So it's not a matter of that we haven't heard it before, but it's that it's really hard sometimes to execute. And sometimes it's easier said than done. Is that fair? And that's what we'd like to share with today and kind of get into. So I'm grateful I could be here. I'm grateful that we could have this experience together. In October of 2004, I was working with Coca-Cola in the middle of Inner Mongolia. I started professionally speaking in 1997 when I moved to Shanghai. And I lived there for 5 years, but then I was back and forth. I do a lot of work in Asia, a lot in Europe as well. But it's interesting because I was traveling a lot. And at the time, I was a long ways away from home. And at the time, I lived in Shanghai. And we were closer to Siberia, actually, than I was to Shanghai at the time. And I was walking this small city. It's about 1 million people, so small by population. And this little girl, she just walked up to me and she just started rubbing the hair on my arms. And I thought, wow, she's really, really brave. So I said, and the first thing she said to me was, "Wow, say, right? What in the world is all that hair doing on your arms and not on your head?" And she was concerned, right? She was concerned, and she wanted to know, what's it like? Are you a monk? Are you not a monk? So I sat right on the ground, and we talked for about 45 minutes, almost an hour. Her aunt was watching very closely as she was selling her beverage cart on the street. She was watching us closely, and at the end I asked her to take this photo. But during that conversation, she asked me, what's it like to live in North America? I said, would you ever want to go there and see it for yourself? And she said, no. And I said, why not? And she said, well, I wouldn't like the food, duh. 5 years old, this girl had an opinion. And I said, well, what about Shanghai? Because Shanghai has Chinese food, and it's a long ways away from where we are here. Would you ever want to go to Shanghai and see that for yourself? And she said, no. I said, why not? She simply looked at me and she said this. She said, why would I want to go anywhere else if I'm so happy right here? Why would I want to go anywhere else if I'm so happy right here? Folks, I know that we don't have magic wands to make everything perfect, and I'm not suggesting that because she's never been somewhere else that maybe she wouldn't enjoy going somewhere else. But the statement still is quite amazing, isn't it? It's quite profound. Why would I want to go anywhere else if I'm so happy right here? Do people do better work when they're happier where they work? Is it fair? They do. And we've known this, like we said, for a long, long time. And as a matter of fact, there's a lot of companies that have been saying this for a very long time. If anyone's familiar with the name Marriott, before they became a hotel chain, the Marriotts actually had root beer stands in Washington, D.C. This is in the 1920s. And in the 1920s, they actually said this. They put a sign up in their window, and they started serving warm food in their little restaurant. And they said, gosh, if we take care of people, our own people, they'll take care of the customer. So in 2024, when I still hear people talking like this is brand new, I get a little bit jaded. I get a little bit cynical, right? I get a little bit tired because I'm like, no, don't lecture to me like this is brand new. We've been talking about it for a really long time. The challenge is in the execution, not in the fact that we haven't known the truth for a very long time. And frankly, this just isn't a fun way to go to work. Right? Is there anyone that feels like this is just a really fun time? Like, gosh, I'm so glad I get to go to work today. Like, it's a pick-me-up. So what do? It's not just about what I know IQ-wise, but what I know EQ-wise, right? My emotional intelligence. and what I bring to the table matters. And that's a big deal. Deming was not my personal friend, but he's a friend of my business partners. I don't know if you know Deming, but for a short context, it's worthy of the cause. Deming was a statistician and a quality engineer, right? Super guru at what he did. And he wrote, at the time, a lot of work that in the US, a lot of people were like, whatever, this is right after World War II. But Japan paid attention. So Toyota called him over and said, could you come help us to think about how we produce better? Not only to produce better, but to create quality at scale. And creating quality is one thing, but to do it at scale, a whole other thing. And he helped to create the Toyota production system. But that Toyota production system, just to keep in mind, it wasn't originally called that. It was actually originally called the Respect for Humanity system. Isn't that interesting? A production system to create quality at scale was originally called the Respect for Humanity system. And because we respect people, therefore we reduce waste. In the United States, we actually took some of those concepts later and brought them over. But one of my senseis, his name was Ritsuo Shingo, his father, Shigeo Shingo, worked with Deming. And they did this and built the Toyota production system together. My sensei, Ritsuo, was the president of Toyota China. And so he actually followed his father's footsteps in the same product and in the same engineering. And he would often teach me, whether I was in China, Japan, whether we were in the United States, and sometimes we were actually walking through healthcare facilities here in the United States, and Ritsuo would just, and this was after he retired from Toyota, and he would say, Maxa, come here. This is, we've got to do something different. In fact, one time we were at a hospital in the United States where there was a lot of mistakes being made. The blood draw is being drawn every time because it's really difficult that every time you take a blood draw, you put it in your pocket and you go and do another blood draw and another one. But if you don't label them immediately, mistakes are easily made. But how do you label that immediately if you don't have a printer or something nearby? So they didn't have a good answer for that, and mistakes were being made. And Ritsuo actually went to the lab and said, hey, you're making these mistakes at about 4 to 5 times per month. Is that an acceptable rate for you? And the lab techs were like, wait a minute, why am I being asked these questions, number one? And he was just trying to figure out, he was being super humble, he wasn't trying to attack them. He was just trying to say, how do you reduce the mistakes? They didn't really have a good answer for it. And I'll never forget, he was super kind to the people as we walked, and we walked away and we said, but when we met with the executive team, he said, with all due respect, my job at Toyota was to produce a product that would save lives. What are you doing here at this hospital to save lives? The challenge was, how do we continue to improve? So Deming wrote this to my business partner once in one of his letters.